So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our special celebration of International Women's Day today. And also welcome to our, I think, 180 who are registered for our webinar, which is a fantastic turnout. So welcome to everybody. So we've got a fabulous array of speakers lined up for you today who will guide you through some of the statistics and issues around the need to encourage more girls to take up STEM subjects in schools and thereby equipping themselves to become part of the actuarial profession and, of course, other STEM-related professions. But I'd like to put this a little bit into context first. Firstly, gender diversity is just one aspect of the whole spectrum of diversity and inclusion. And the Institute's Diversity and Inclusion Working Group, that I'm very pleased to be leader of, with a great team, is focused on an all-encompassing diversity of thought mantra. As you'll have seen from our articles and podcasts in Actuaries Digital, and will continue to see as we roll out new initiatives throughout this year. For example, for the first time last week, the Institute's website masthead was proudly showing its rainbow colours. Ongoing support of the LGBTQI community is very important to the Institute and will be a key area of focus for the Diversity and Inclusion Working Group. Although today we are specifically focused on encouraging greater numbers of girls to take up maths and equip themselves to enter the profession and other STEM-related fields, it's also important to recognise that once women start working, subtle discrimination can often happen which can put them at a career disadvantage. I read a quote this morning from Professor Ruth McPhail, Business School Department Head at Griffith University. When asked what can be done to improve the gender gap, her response was, "We need leadership from men and women, measurable performance targets, flexible workplaces, reduced travel, training, champions and allies, clear career paths, fair recruiting and promotion, inclusive networking, and ongoing support to change the status quo." That's quite a list. I'll just pick up on one of these for a moment, champions and allies. This is not just an issue for women themselves to deal with. It has been shown that the real effective action by senior leadership of any gender is often the key to making a difference. To quote the CEO of BizCover's Michael Gottlieb, "We need to make sure we fast-track females to senior levels, because ultimately you need role models and success stories, and you need it for other people to believe it and inspire the next generation of girls." When I wrote the article that was published in Actuaries Digital a couple of days ago on the earliest female actuaries, one of the common threads that ran through each of their stories was that they all had a champion, interestingly predominantly male, to encourage them to study in the first place. There is an organisation called Male Champions of Change who state that we need more decent, powerful men to step up beside women, note, beside women, in building a gender equal world. I'm now looking at all you guys in the audience. So this is an every person issue, not just a female one. To encourage girls to do STEM subjects, to be able to see that being an actuary is a genuine gender neutral career, we need to provide them with great role models. To do that, we also need to tackle the confidence gap that often affects women. A significant confidence gap appears between the genders within 2 to 5 years of women joining the workforce. Nearly half of all new female employees aspire to top management, but within 5 years, only 16% hold that ambition. An oft-quoted statistic is that women will apply for a role if they feel they have 90% of what is required, whereas men feel they only need half of that. So, do women lose confidence because they feel they are treated less equally, or are they treated less equally because they have lost confidence? That's a leadership issue, and more needs to be done to disrupt biased work practices and mindsets that chip away at female confidence and hold back female progression, and the opportunity to build gender-balanced teams and senior role models for our students to aspire to. So that brings us back, of course, to today's topic. And I'd like to introduce our esteemed guests today. Nicolette Rubinstein needs no introduction. and she's told me not to give her one, so I won't. But we'd like to welcome Professor Russell Tytler, who's the Alfred Deakin Professor and Chair in Science Education at Deakin University. He has researched and written extensively on student learning and reasoning in science, and is one of the authors of Girls' Future, Our Future. Also like to welcome Dr. Ning Li. Welcome, Ning. Ning is the Choose Maths gender researcher. Her recent gender report, Participation, Performance and Attitudes Towards Mathematics, focuses on the gender disparity in maths education in Australia. And Janine McIntosh. Janine is the Australian Mathematical Sciences Institute Schools Programme Manager and the Architect and Project Director for Choose Maths. She is one of the authors of ICEM Mathematics and has developed a suite of online and career materials in her time at AMSI. So without further ado, I will introduce Nicolette. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Special hello to everyone on the webinar. Thank you for joining us. So my job today is actually to provide a bit of context about why we have got the lineup of speakers that we have brought to you today. And that's not my first slide, nor is that. I'd like to provide a little bit of context first with the Actuaries Institute strategy. So if you look at the second goal, you will see that our second strategic goal, and this is our 3-year plan, is called Growth and Diversity. So why is diversity important? I'm assuming that everyone in this audience is already convinced on this, so I'm not going to go into that in much detail. Suffice to say, it is important for both economic and ethical reasons. The economic reasons are very well documented, thanks mainly to McKinsey, who has done every which study on growth, profit, risk, showing that better diversity leads to better performance, economic performance. And ethical, basically it's just the right thing to do. So I decided to dedicate my presidential address this year to gender diversity in actuaries, partly because, as I said, it's a key part of our strategy and probably one of the more underdeveloped parts of our strategy. It's also, this area of women in STEM is getting a lot more academic focus, we're going to hear today, and media focus. And the other reason is that I really did not know the answer to this question. Why are only 25% of our fellows female? You know, is it because boys are better at maths than girls? Is it a glass ceiling? Is it because girls don't really fancy a career as an actuary? And it turns out to be none of those things, really. Another kind of motivator was that for the first time this year, we have quite an unusual situation with a female president, senior vice president, and CEO. So I thought we should make the most of that. If the guys are feeling a bit left out at this stage, I'll just let you know that Jefferson Gibbs is the vice president this year. So you're in very good hands. And I did want to say a special thank you to all the guys attending today. Elaine and I were looking through the people attending, and it was amazing to see a 50-50 split. And that was so heartening for me, because it's a societal issue, and it's something that we need to solve together. So special thank you to the men in the room and on the webinar. Another motivator was this piece of work by Adam Butt and Leonie Tickle, who looked at gender diversity in university students at our Australian universities. And I should add my own personal motivation. You know, a lot of you will know that I wrote a book on career mums, so I'm sort of slap bang in the middle of this gender diversity area. But I also have 3 daughters, so a vested interest in getting this right. So let's have a look at the analysis. So this chart shows you the pipeline and the percentage female at each point in time. So we start off with year 12 students, and about 49% of them are female. And then if we go to the other end of the actuarial pipeline, we see that actuarial fellows, 25% are female. If we look at our associate actuary level, it is higher at 40%. If we look at some sort of more recent data and we look at fellows who've qualified in the last 15 years, pleasingly we see that that 25 increases to 33. There's lots of seats up here at the front. So that 33 makes a lot of sense, because it means that obviously the older actuaries are predominantly male, and we know that historically it has been quite male dominated. If we look at associate actuaries aged between 30 and 40, interestingly, we see that nearly half are female. When we look at that university level, and that's the work that Leonie and Adam did, about a third are female. And actually, in my paper, I actually called that the good, because that's actually a lot better than other STEM subjects like engineering and IT that are down at 16%. But then when we go right back to the beginning again and we look at the percentage of kids studying advanced maths at school, and that advanced maths, by the way, is defined differently in different states, but we find that a third of that population are female. So the first and main conclusion is that that 1/3 figure perpetuates throughout that pipeline. A third at school, go to a third at university, and a third of our fellows. The second key finding I found out of this was really this 33%. I feel passionately that actuarial is a great work environment for women, and I think by better marketing our profession, we can raise that 33. And the other key finding is this 48, which looks like a lot of women are choosing to stay at the associate actuary level and not progress to the fellow level. And again, that's probably not surprising, because between 30 and 40, we often have other stuff to do. Some of us have been rearing children. But it does raise a question whether we can better support female actuaries who do want to progress. So the key conclusion out of all of that is, until we increase the percentage of girls doing advanced maths at school, we will not meaningfully increase our gender diversity in our actuarial population. So why is the take-up of advanced maths by girls so low? And it was when I sort of sought to answer this question that I came across the research that Russell, the two papers that Russell's a co-author of and Ning is a co-author of. So I'm not really going to go into this in much detail, because this is what they are going to cover for you. But the two things that popped out for me that are quite clear is, one reason is lower confidence, and one is, and this one got me really worked up actually, is really a gender stereotyping in our schools. Why does all of that matter? 75% of future jobs will require STEM skills. Only 33% of STEM graduates are female, so interestingly, we are bang on the STEM average. So women are disadvantaged. We are not preparing them well for the future. And ultimately, that will actually impact our economic prospects as a nation relative to other countries that are doing a much better job than we are. So what can we do? Now, the take-up of advanced maths by girls at school is a bigger problem than the Actuaries Institute is able to solve. So my first conclusion here was that we need to partner with people that are active in this area. And AMSI, which is where Ning and Janine are from, is one area that we've sort of discovered that are doing a lot of work in this area. As I mentioned, I think we also can improve how we market our profession. And I've been quite struck by this term social belongingness in the research, which really means that people, and this isn't just a gender thing, this would be a cultural or sexual orientation, but you will choose a career based on where you think you will fit in. And I think we can really tick this box from a gender diversity perspective now. And this is just a visual of all our amazing female actuaries. I'm actually going to take a little bit longer here. I just wanted to tell you a story because one absolutely lovely email that I got was from Tim Trahair, who is, I think he's now 82. But when I arrived in Australia and worked for Towers Perrin, he was I think he was one of the founders of TPF&C, and so he was sort of one of the older actuaries in the office. Anyway, he wrote me an email about his views on women in the workplace. But one of the things he mentioned was that the first actuary in Australia, Kathy Prime, I didn't realize this, but she had actually worked for Towers Perrin, which made me realize that actually I'm the 6th female president that we've had in the Actuaries Institute, and that means that 4 of the 6 actually worked at Towers Perrin. So Kathy, Helen Rowell, Jenny Lyon, and myself. And I just think that that is a really good evidence of this social belongingness, that actually there was a supportive environment there for women, and when that we were inclined to join there and stay there. And when I first joined Towers Perrin, Jenny and Helen were the 2 female principals at the time, and they had just had children and they were just working part-time there, and that was radical in those days. And it was, they were real trailblazers actually. But that was one of the things that gave me the idea about working flexibly. So it just shows you how this role modeling works. The second thing we can do, I think, is have a look at our value proposition in terms of how we attract people into our profession. And I've been quite struck again by some work by Yolanda Beatty, who's been looking at funds management and how you attract more women into funds management, because they've got quite a significant gender diversity issue. And Yolanda, she used to work for Mercer's. So they've been looking at, well, what will appeal to women about a career in funds management? What is the value proposition? And they've said that women want to be able to make a difference. They want to be able to work in a team-based and collaborative environment, and they want to be able to solve complex problems. And so there's, complete parallels really into actuarial. And to be honest, I think a lot of men want the same thing as well. So, I think by evidencing those sort of aspects that we can improve that 33% studying actuarial. Someone didn't agree with that. And the third thing is positioning. Thanks, Liz. We need to, maths sometimes isn't seen as cool. And I think we need to evidence more the creative aspects of what we do in our jobs. Sometimes it seems to be quite mechanical, and we need to show how it can be creative. And as I said, for those female associate actuaries who do want to progress to fellow level, we need to look at how we can better support them in that journey. And just one thing, we've just been going around the country, Elaine and I, on this CPD tour, but a lady came up to us afterwards and said, she was studying actuarial, she had 2 young kids, and she asked whether she could do the course over, I don't know if it was a year or 2 years instead of the normal 6 months, and we basically said no.
10 years back, not now.
10 years back. All right. Did you check, Elaine? Anyway, I was hoping there was some quick wins like that anyway. But, I'm not sure what the answer to this last one is, but I think we need to look at it. So I'm going to wrap up there. I've been really overwhelmed by the feedback from my presidential address. I've got really loads of lovely emails, feedback on LinkedIn. So please keep it coming. I'm really enjoying the feedback. Now I'm going to hand over to Ning from AMSI, and she's going to give you some in-depth stats on girls and how they study maths at school. Thank you.
Okay, Thanks very much for the opportunity to talk about the gender gap in participation, performance, and attitudes towards math. As Nicolette mentioned in her presidential address, the major leak in the of STEM candidates in the pipeline from school to university to workforce has taken place at the school stage. Then what's happening at school? And what's happening to the year 12 students? Okay, in Australia, most year 12 students are aged 17 to 18. And the national population in this age group actually have more boys than girls. So as you can see from the top panel of the graph, there are 7% more boys than girls at an age that are suitable for studying year 12. But not everyone in that age group actually studied the year 12. The middle panel shows the number of girls and the number of boys actually attended the year 12. So actually you can see there are more girls attended the year 12 than boys nationally. So the girls are leading year 12 annual enrollments by 10 percentage points. And among all the year 12 students, how many of them studied mathematics? That you can see from the, you can see from the bottom panel of the curves. Actually, there are as high as almost 90% of the year 12 students have studied some kind of mathematics subjects in year 12. So 90% of the year 12 students actually did some type of math. This rate sounds high. However, the majority of those students, the math students, they only enrolled in elementary level math. And the elementary level math did not prepare them for STEM. So therefore, the majority of year 12 students or year 12 graduates who studied some form of math actually did not meet the minimum requirement for STEM subjects. So, and therefore they dropped out from the STEM pipeline. This is the major leak in the STEM pipeline. Okay. From this graph, we can see clearly this leak happens to both boys and the girls. The boys on the left and the girls on the right. And the green area represent the share of the students doing elementary level math. We can see this is more than 60%. So that's why we say the majority of the year 12 graduates are not ready for STEM. Okay. Although this leak happened to both boys and girls, but situation for girls are worse because the girls are less likely to take on any math subject at any level. So you can see here the top pair of curves represent the proportion of year 12 students who studied elementary level math. And the bottom pair of the curves represent the proportion of year 12 students who enrolled in advanced math. This picture clearly shows that elementary level math is more popular, much more popular than the advanced level math among both girls and boys. However, girls are less likely to take on math at any level, as you can see clearly from the relatively lower position of the pink lines as compared to the blue lines for boys. So we can see from this data. And as Nicolette just mentioned, 1/3 of the advanced math students, only 1/3 of them are girls. So, and that trend did not improve over the recent years. In 2016, for every 100 Year 12 boys, 12 of them did advanced math. But for every 100 Year 12 girls, only 7 of them did advanced math. So girls are severely underrepresented in advanced math. Okay, that's the situation. And girls' lower interest in math is strongly associated with their lower performance. The National Assessment Program in Literacy and Numeracy is the only standard test in Australia. Every year, all the years 3, 5, 7, and 9 students, irrespective of you from government school or independent school or Catholic school, everyone in these year levels sit in NAPLAN. So these NAPLAN results allow us to compare boys and girls' performance. So you can see the pink lines are consistently lower than the blue lines. They represent the average, the mean scores for boys and girls. Okay, so this is consistent over time and across year levels. And internationally, the program for international students assessment called PISA, that is a worldwide standard test for all the 15-year-olds across different countries. Here, the solid line represents the results for math, because PISA tests students on English literature, math, and science. So this data also shows that the average performance of girls in this is Australian data, also below the average score of boys in every single PISA cycle. Okay, so this evidence support the theoretical statement that lower interest is strongly associated with the lower performance. Okay, this is something we would like to change. However, here, I also like to point out that the dotted line, no, the dashed lines here represent the average scores in reading. So we can see girls outperform the boys in reading. And the gender gap in reading almost tripled the gender gap in math. So for many girls who are enrolled in advanced level math, they are very likely also very good at reading or very good at literature. So that may give the girls, those highly capable girls, more opportunity to choose their careers. So the fact is that those girls are more likely than boys ended up in a career outside STEM. Maybe that's my hypothesis. Okay, well, I haven't had any data, but just from this data, we can make that hypothesis. Okay, when we asked our math teachers, we presented them with a number of items, a number of factors that possibly affect the students' decision in their voluntary math enrollment. And most teachers, math teachers, think that students' previous performance is the most significant factor to affect them, whether to keep or drop math, or which level of math students will do. Okay, this is teacher's opinion. However, students choose math also surveyed students. Students data shows a different story. Students think teacher factor, teaching affects. Teacher factor is the most influential factor in students' learning experience. Students' their own performance also important, but that only explains about a quarter of the variability in their learning experience, while the teacher factor explains 1/3 of the variabilities in their learning experience. So how to match or how to explain this difference between teacher's opinion and the student's opinion, that's also interesting. And why some students choose math and why some students drop math beyond the year 10, and why not that many girls to study or to take a STEM career. And Professor Russell will have more on that. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ning, and some interesting data there to think about and explain. I'm the diversity aspect of this presentation, and I've been involved in gender actually for some time. I was a physics teacher and a physics lecturer back in the 80s and 90s, and I became involved in a rewrite of the Victorian physics curriculum, charged with really changing it to make it more attractive to girls. And in fact, we did change it against resistance. And we did have some success, although the results dropped away within about 3 or 4 years. And at that stage in Victoria, certainly, there was an active group of female teachers and academics. They were called the McClintock Collective, really pushing to change the way science was taught in schools to make it more attractive to girls. So there was a strong history right through the 90s of really trying to address these issues of, how are we doing? Sorry, address these issues of gender disparity, in this case particularly in the physical sciences, but certainly that was a similar story with maths. Following that, more recently I've been involved in a number of significant literature reviews for the Commonwealth Government, first of all, about the reasons students do or don't go on with STEM subjects, not particularly charged with gender, but then immediately, of course, you find that gender becomes an interesting and major theme in some of this. And we also did this study on participation of women in engineering for the Origin Foundation a couple of years ago. Then I was involved in this major review of comparison of STEM research and teaching and learning across 26 countries for the Australian government. It was part of Ian Chubb's push to promote STEM back in the early 2010s. That was a 2013 study. And again, what we discovered there, and it was rather surprising and disappointing to me, was that a lot of what we thought were achievements back through the 90s and early 2000s, really it had gone backwards. That somehow people had relaxed. They thought this problem we know about, we now have knowledgeable approaches to this, and yet in fact here's the problem: just as much remaining with us. So there are some significant questions. 3 years ago, or 3 years ago, we did this study for the Invergary Foundation, which is based in really a group of girls' schools around Australia, looking at this question of how do you attract girls into the STEM disciplines. And out of that, we reviewed a lot of the evidence from these previous studies, and also we did a number of interviews with people in positions of influence or who might be able to cast some light on the situation. And so a lot of what I'll be talking about now is based on that study. Okay. So what I'm going to do is basically this. I'm going to rehearse the argument which Nicolette touched on about why should we bother, because I think it is a question we need to be clear about the factors that we know through the literature to impact on girls' STEM engagement, and finally just some directions that really that literature seems to indicate are worthwhile to pursue. One of the things that, as I said, from these reviews that was clear is that really we're no better off than we were back in the 90s when these issues really started to be canvassed seriously. In that review panel we did, which was run by the Australian Council of Learned Academies, one of our panel members said, look, I really have to ask this question. Why does it matter? If girls like biology and boys like physics, then what's the problem with that? And so we were forced to really articulate what it is, or what the arguments are that we really need to address this as an issue. And these are the 5 arguments that we came up with or we generated in this document based on reports from the various countries. First of all, there's the argument that really, if we're dealing with STEM, and let's include, actuarial work and high-level maths, engineering, and so on, if we're charged with, in those areas of research and development and professional activity with solving problems in the world, then in fact there are problems that influence women and that women have more insight into that we need to take into account. And so having more gender diversity makes the research potentially more relevant. Also, the argument that Nicolette put is this question of diversity, meaning creativity and reduction of bias, that the inclusion, the more equal inclusion of women in professions and in STEM research and development will boost the quality of the work in there. There's a social justice argument. Not only, I think, we're talking equality of opportunity, because technically women have the same opportunity as men, but there are systemic factors we really need to address if we're going to talk about real equality of opportunity. Another argument is that there's a lot of government funding going into these areas, and if so, then it should not be concentrated in only the male population, that gender issues need to be addressed. And finally, this issue of human capital, and if there's a whole lot of girls who could be really talented at maths or actuarial work that could be, then we're missing out on valuable human capital. So I think the arguments are compelling, and they're certainly not trivial there. Just to rehearse, and you've seen some of these figures, they are quite compelling in the physical sciences and in advanced maths. So you've got there the proportion of boys going into advanced maths is 11% compared to girls 6.2%. It's slightly different to your figures, but probably there's a slight year level. Yeah, it's how it's counted. There are differences there. Actually, physics is even worse. 21% boys and 5.9% girls. Right? So we've got a problem with maths, particularly the higher level maths, and we've got a problem with physics and chemistry as well. So I think, as I said, in dealing or in discussing these issues, you realise that in fact in many ways we've dropped the ball on this issue over the last couple of decades, and there is a need really to take this seriously. And I think that that is reflected in a lot of activity now in this area. So what are the factors we're dealing with here in terms of girls' participation in STEM? And no one's pretending they're not complex, because we're dealing with a multifactorial, I think, situation here. And I'll go through each of them in turn. Just to flag it here, aspects of home and community, gendered stereotypes established quite early, home and family, and particularly pertinent for low SES environments. Expectations of girls compared to boys, and so on. Also broad public perceptions and stereotypes, where media and institutional factors shape behaviours and expectations of paths. Teaching and learning, which again was touched on there, where teacher expectations and perceptions, curriculum structures, and I'll go into that a little bit, all help to shape boys and girls' perceptions as to whether they should, or they would feel comfortable or would see it as valuable to go on with that subject. And finally, understanding of careers, expectations, and also so the gendered nature of workplaces also impacts back on what students think about when they're thinking about a career in school. And that image there from Choose Maths is really signalling a lot of activity that's trying to address the way kids see these subjects and these future careers into maths and the physical sciences. So just let's look at some of the evidence. And again, I'm drawing on the Imbagari report we did quite heavily here. There's an association from an early age that children have as young as 6 of science and STEM with males. That these different gendered experiences with parents, carers, and so on shape the way kids see their potential futures as being gender biased. There was a study, for instance, I remember I was quite taken with in families going to museums and looking at exhibits and the way parents talk to girls compared to boys. And guess which of their children are challenged to do the thinking questions and which are challenged to talk about what they're seeing in descriptive terms. So there's kind of this really intuitive and unconscious bias that often happens with families in the way they treat futures. There's gendered subjects and career choices that girls with high scores in maths can be less likely than to go into maths areas than boys with lower scores. So even despite, even with boys and girls with equal scores, it's more likely the boys go on into a STEM area. There's early aspiration and career interests develop. We found there are a number of studies in the science area where even back into primary school we're now finding children will be thinking of themselves in terms of career, where you get a gender bias in terms of what they think is appropriate for them. And that's an issue. I need to raise this issue of innate differences, whether these early differences in expectations and interests are in fact innate, and that was raised by Ning. The study, probably the most comprehensive study from back in the early 2000s that we reviewed in an article we wrote around attitudes to STEM, really examined all of the evidence and found there was no evidence of an innate difference in ability that would explain these differences in participation, and that argued that in fact the problem was much more complex than that as a simple statement. And part of it is around this question of the construction of gender socially. That we know, this quote here, I think is quite telling, that the development of children, the sex differences in social roles and occupations are constructed from the complex and dynamic interaction between the environments in which a person grows up and is exposed to and their biology. And so the biological differences really interact with the social construction of gender in more complex ways than one might think about. And the way this happens becomes internalized into the way we see ourselves, our cerebral biology. Interesting set of studies by Andrew, I think it is, Meltzoff, a psychologist, about early influences on children. In this case, this particular paper showed that their gendered self-concept, the association of maths with gender, occurred, this notion that girls don't do maths, before there was any kind of measure of mathematical ability or mathematical results in school. So it's in the self-concept preceded the actual difference in ability that Ning was referring to, and rather than the other way around. One of the interesting theoretical constructs or ways of looking at this question that's been prominent recently is this question of identity, or this construct of identity. This notion of our identity in terms of the way, or who we see ourselves to be and who we can imagine ourselves to be in the future. And a lot of the work now is going on around this area of how do you actually encourage identity formation in girls that is consistent with the kind of work that occurs in the STEM fields. A lot of what is acting against the construction of identities that would encourage participation in STEM for girls have to do with the cultural nature of subjects and masculine images and expectations that have been developed in those subjects in school. And when we did the Invergaris study, both with the literature and with the interviews we did, this came through very strongly, that there's so many influences that shape girls' perceptions of what it is to work in a STEM field, actuarial, for instance, and how they see their potential future in that. Some of that is in curriculum framing. I know as a physics teacher what we try to do very much with the physics problems, the classic projectile motion problems always had cannons and arrows. There was a lot of violence. And what we tried to do actually was to introduce contexts of dance and sport, for instance, to try and make it more gender neutral, if you like. But it was very hard actually, because almost all the physics teachers were male and were interested in those things that acted against us a bit. Also, assessment regimes, multiple choice tests, for instance, as I said, have been shown to favour boys. They tend to be more risk takers and quick at sort of choosing, and girls tend to do better at assessments that are a little bit more complex, and histories of the framing of subjects. Influences of teachers, who will tend also to, it's been shown certainly in the physics community, tend to talk to the boys more, and the boys put up their hands more, and the girls tend to hang back or think of themselves as not quite naturally physics savvy, maybe because the teacher keeps talking to the boys. So there's a lot of inbuilt teacher bias in this, quite unwittingly, and also this difference in confidence for the same sort of level of result. Girls will say, well, I'm not very good at this, and boys will say, well, I didn't do well on that test, but really, I'm better than that. So it is a tangible difference there. I'm going to move quickly through these last few slides. This notion of career stereotyping, one of the big things that is being worked on a lot, and you'll see it online a lot, these images of women in careers that really try and project the possibilities in these careers of strong female models, and the fact that you know, you can be a woman and have a productive career in these areas that might have been thought of traditionally as males. And a lot of that has to do with getting career advice that's knowledgeable, and often careers teachers really themselves don't understand everything that's possible and what the gender possibilities are with a lot of these careers, and teachers themselves will not necessarily be savvy about that. So there's a lot of work to be done there. There's a lot of work to be done with mentoring, role models, and so on. I think that's simply a summary over the years of the different influences there, but just to show you that really from preschool there are things to be done right up through the point at which you choose a career at year 11, 12. I think the quick my take-home message: start early, create an encouraging culture of pedagogy and assessment, provide supportive educational experiences, provide ongoing STEM career awareness, and engage with carefully selected role models. That's really what came out of our Invergary report. Okay, thank you. I'll hand over to Janine. Yeah.
Hello everyone, and thanks everybody at the Actuaries Institute. I've been so welcomed. It's been such a lovely day so far. So today I'm going to talk to you about young women. The young woman on the right was told when she was doing her subject selection going into year 11, don't you want to do something fun? She chose chemistry, physics, 2 maths, had done biology in the year before, and of course she had to do English. And she said, well, physics is my fun subject. Russell, you'd be pleased to hear it. She's my daughter. One of 3 children, all who've gone into some kind of STEM field, I'm very proud to say, without any influence from their mother at all. But I'm here to talk to you about AMSI. AMSI is the collaborative joint venture of 12 universities who are our owners and another 30-something members, Bureau of Statistics, Bureau of Meteorology, all the university mathematics departments, DST group, CSIRO are all members of AMSI. And we've been going since 2002. Our aim is the same as anyone who's interested in STEM, mathematics, sciences, to get more people to do the thing that we love better and more often. And we do this in lots of different ways. We do it across 3 program areas. We've got an intern program, research and higher education program, and a schools education program, which I manage. The intern program might be of interest to some of you. We place postgraduate students into industry placements for that 4 months while they're waiting to receive the results of their PhD, and they've done some amazing projects. There's been some on chocolate, some on dance floors, and some on concrete pipework. It's just been fantastic. There was one project I heard about that was to do with the coal industry, with the mining industry, and coal's sticky and it sticks to the bins. And these students designed a bin liner that stopped the coal sticking very cheaply. It was retrofittable, and those 2 students got a job with that company, and the company had the this new technology that they could use and sell, and it was just fantastic. So why choose maths? Well, I think we've heard a little bit about Ning. You've seen these graphs before. This is our latest data. This is higher and intermediate mathematics around the country, and as Russell said, it depends on at what point you collect some of the data. That's the difference in the numbers usually. Sometimes we talk about total enrolment, sometimes we talk about total completion, so it depends on where in year 12 you're talking about it. And this is similar to Russell's image of the pipeline. The issue starts in primary school. So in primary school, students are getting the message already. Have you ever walked down the toy aisles in a very large department store? There's one very prominent colour for girls and another prominent colour for boys. And then in secondary school, the gender imbalance begins. So girls are opting out already. The teachers are teaching out of area. We've got poor career advice. Very often the careers people are not STEM trained themselves and they don't understand the issues. What happens then when they go to university is that, or TAFE or trade or whatever, wherever they go post compulsory education, is that maths is often not a prerequisite for the courses. It is for actuary, we know, but it's not for lots of other courses that it could be useful for. So students are opting out and finding that without the calculus, if you like, in the subjects that they did in year 12, they can't progress into the subjects they'd like to do in first year university, and they often drop out or they funnel themselves into a biology degree or something that might mean they end up being a teacher of biology without a maths background. So we're looking at lots of different ways to speak to these people. Out in the workplace, of course, we need maths skills, and we're increasingly being told that by employers. All of the employer organisations that we speak to tell us that they want more maths grads. And then the public says, but girls don't do maths. So when you see our pink Choose Maths tram going up and down Swanston Street, or a bus, or you see our Choose Maths banners out on the station at Central Station here in Sydney, just take a photo of it, share it around and tell the people in your life that maths is important, because I think you're the people who are our best advocates. So we've heard all these things before. 75% of the growing occupations require STEM skills. 45 of the current jobs will disappear in 15 years. Taking maths to a higher level helps with all of these skills, not necessarily very mathematical, you might have thought, and certainly the public think that way. The top 10 jobs for 2016 and 2017 all require enormous amounts of mathematics. And this is our problem. Lawyers study law, scientists study scientists, doctors study medicine, engineers study engineering, actuaries study actuarial studies. But maths is a little different. We don't have that maths name in our titles. We're often called analysts or different things. So the public don't know about us. When they go searching for us, they don't find us. We're not there. We're risk modelers. We're bioinformaticians. I gave birth to one of those as well. We're data analytics. We're, analyst, underwriter. It's all there. We talk about the different levels of mathematics required and where it can take you. And then we talk to women particularly about what's needed. So I'm going to jump through some of these because you can read the data yourself. As Russell said, we work from the supposition that there's no difference between men and women with regard to mathematics. So our outreach work is in 120 schools across the country. I have 8 teachers, fabulous teachers. The team's all back in the office at the moment, probably watching on the webinar. And they go out to schools and support teachers in their development of maths programs, in their planning and in their content knowledge. And the content knowledge is key. Our mentoring program delivers to clusters of students via Zoom, so using technology to get girls in front of mentors who are mathematically capable professionals across a range of fields. And they get to speak to industry and academics and university students, so they can talk about career trajectories. They can talk about what you studied at mathematics. They can say, well, I'm a bit like you. I think I could be someone like you, and see themselves in that career. And the feedback has just been, I'm going to zip through this, but the feedback has just been stunning. Listening to the types of jobs, telling us what they've done over their careers. The session sort of allowed me to think of ways to study better, supported me in doing all of those things. So there's lots and lots of feedback that we're getting from our girls. Our careers awareness campaign, our primary target is girls as young as 9 through to 16. 9 is when they're getting that I have a maths brain or I don't have a maths brain mentality. 16 is subject choice, or the beginning of that conversation about subject choice. And the secondary influences includes yourself, parents, teachers, careers advisors, people who are going to give advice about that. And so we decided on the tagline, if you like, you are more than a number. And we've used that extensively across our network. Soleil, I apologise. I didn't realise she was going to be in the audience. No, I thought I should have our superstar actuary on my slide set. So Soleil, as with hundreds of other ambassadors and supporters, has been very, very generous with her time and helped us, and didn't mind too much when she was getting text messages about, I saw you on a bus. So we've got Cassie, who works for the CFA and uses her data analytical skills to map fires and talk about fire protection. We've got Supply Planner, getting gas into your home. Lots of maths involved. Charles Gray's a mathematician. Each of these a lot of these have videos to go with them as well. So go and check out Choose Maths. And then we talk about careers as more than numbers. So Karen works for BHP. This was our tram. We ran out and took photos. I have 1 minute. Our Choose Maths Awards. This is where we say to the teaching community and to the students, you're valued, you're important, and thank them. And we thank them with money, actually. So of our 44 candidates nominated in 2018, 10 of them had prize is one of them in $20,000 amount. It's the biggest prize in the country for teachers, and it's stunning. And this teacher last year was working in a school where she was encouraging more girls into mathematics in a variety of ways. It was just great. The Student Awards, we get up to 1,000 videos to watch each year. So we have to watch lots of lovely videos about how maths is fantastic. So get onto our website and have a look at those. And I won't go through too much of the research because Ning's already run through a lot of that. But we're learning more and more all the time about what teachers feel comfortable with, what they're ready to do, and that helps us then do our work better. So the gender report's going to look at that maths anxiety and is it contagious? So the next time you're having a conversation over the breakfast table with somebody and they're saying, I'm a bit wobbly mathematically, don't say, so was I. You can say anything else, but don't say that. And I'd also just wanted to mention the intern program. So AMC's APR intern program goes right across all fields, not just focused on mathematics. And we're driving lots of PhDs into industry. I think this is a really lovely connection supported by the Australian government. And of course, Greg Taylor from Taylor Fry. I'll leave you with his quote that interns really supported lots of that. So if I can follow Russell's lead and have some take-homes for you, positive conversations about mathematics, supporting the community in any way you can, so putting back into local schools through the ambassadors, lots of things. We'll be putting out calls through the Actuaries Institute for people to come and help us do talks, because it's always great when we've got a real person come and do a talk for us who's working in industry and using their math skills, and getting the message out there to our friends and family. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed to all our presenters, a fabulous range of thoughts and ideas on the subject. We're going to move on to questions. If our pals could come and take their seats, please. And if you'd like to ask a question, can you please raise your hand and make sure that you grab a microphone from one of the girls so that the people on the webinar can also hear what the question is. So, who's going to kick off and be first?
I'll go first. Because I saw that Russell skipped over a slide that I'm sure a lot of people are interested in, which is the same-sex versus co-ed. Should we be sending our girls to one or the other? Any evidence? And I'm interested in other people's view on that as well.
Shall I say briefly? Actually, I was pleased to avoid that because it's actually very controversial, particularly with the Invergary Foundation funding that study. And I taught at a girls' school myself. The argument for an all-girls school is that it gives girls a chance to excel without having to look over their shoulders at what boys think of them, and to develop a more positive model or self-concept, if you like. The actual research is a little bit mixed. You do get, you get studies that do control for socioeconomic factors, and that's one of the difficulties with the research, that girls' schools are often from an upper socioeconomic class. The counter-argument is that really there's a lot to be done with gender-sensitive teaching in co-ed classes that we really should be focusing on, rather than partitioning our population like this. The notion that it's a socially retrograde thing to be splitting off the genders, and also the argument that the problem is not just with the girls and how they feel, it's with the boys, and the boys need to be worked on as well. So separating them off may just put off the problem until a later time. So they're the arguments either way.
Thank you.
Another question. No, I don't really have any data on it. I'm a daughter of a migrant who went to a Western suburb school, and first in family to go to university in a state school, which was co-ed, so I don't have any comment. And our data, I don't think, has split off the type of school to that extent.
We had a question at the front, I believe.
There were a number, thank you very much for very interesting presentations. There were a number of footnotes around Australia is falling behind other countries in this area. What sort of are the lead countries, and what can we learn from them?
I think in terms of, it's quite complex actually, depending on which area you're talking about, because some subjects seem to have a very strong focus going into engineering and technology, and rather than the natural sciences. I'm not sure of the figures on maths. I know Canada is doing better than Australia on gender issues as a comparable country, but you get countries like Turkey also where you get very strong, you know, almost counterintuitively. So I'm not quite sure of what the pattern is there. It seems to be quite complex. We didn't look at that. It just seemed that I'm not aware of any research that's been done to look at patterns, but we're not doing as well as a lot of these comparable countries.
Just one chart that I came across that I've put in an appendix of my paper definitely shows that there is a cultural impact on STEM take-up by women. And I think there's a lot of different stats supporting that. And that particular chart shows this, it's the quite surprising negative correlation between the gender neutrality of a country and the take-up of STEM by girls. So countries that you would that are the most gender neutral, like Norway, Sweden, who you would think would have the highest STEM take-up, actually have the lowest STEM take-up. And the countries that are the least gender neutral, you know, maybe some of the Middle Eastern countries, actually have much higher than Australia. And, you know, so, and in that particular article or the paper that it was based on, they attributed that to if you don't have gender equality in a country, the women want the fastest way to financial independence possible, and STEM is the fastest way. So there's a bigger financial incentive. Whereas in the more gender-neutral countries, that, you know, you kind of do more of what you would like to do, and there's less financial imperative to do it. But generally, and this is sort of more anecdotal than research, but a lot of the Asian countries put a lot bigger cultural emphasis on maths being important. So China, Malaysia, Singapore seem to stand out. And the Middle Eastern countries as well. Turkey is an example, United Arab Emirates. So there's an interesting cultural phenomenon going on. Explaining exactly how and why is quite difficult, I think.
There is, sorry, as part of our 26-country comparison, one thing that was interesting was the attitude towards success in maths in Western versus Confucian or Neo-Confucian systems, and that is in countries like Singapore, China, it's assumed that everyone can do maths well with effort, whereas in the West it tends to be an assumption that you can, if you're talented, you can do well. And so there's a lot of emphasis in getting the whole class up to a level in those Asian countries, those emerging countries, that I think is different to the way teachers view what's happening here.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I just add one really interesting thing that actually manifests in our Australian universities, the actuarial students. And the study by ANU and Macquarie showed this, but interestingly, Elaine and I have just been around the universities, and it's coming through in quite a few of the universities. So the domestic students studying actuarial, the percentage is about a third female, but the international students studying actuarial, the percentage is close to 50%. So, and you know, a lot of those students would be Chinese, but one of the universities has quite a big Thai contingent which has a similar phenomenon. So it just shows you how that cultural phenomenon that's going on.
Thank you. I think we had a question at the back.
Yeah, look, my children, I was surprised to discover when they were considering uni courses how weak a lot of the formal mathematic requirements were for STEM type subjects. And whereas realistically, if you haven't done advanced maths, you really couldn't get through those courses. It might be missing the wood for the trees, but do we have a messaging problem in middle high school when students are first starting to think about maths?
We certainly do. There's a difference, and it's not well understood, between prerequisite knowledge and required knowledge. So a student looks at the prerequisites and says, I'm fine. Their careers advisor says, you're fine. They get to first year, they get to the third lecture in the calculus subject, and they go, I'm not so fine. And that's when they drop out, and there are studies that have been done at Wollongong, Newcastle and Sydney universities that show that not only do they fail in mathematics, but they also fail in chemistry, in psychology, in the related subjects that they need the maths content for. So you're right. And it's about getting students in the door. So the universities don't set the prerequisite because they want a bigger cohort coming in. And it's not necessarily about retaining them once they're there.
I think just on that, Alan Finkel is on a bit of a campaign about this issue, because part of it is about students attempting to game the system and teachers advising them to take a lower maths to get higher scores to get in, and then worry about the consequences later. I think that's...
Our advice is that a student who takes the elementary maths subject sits back, cruises along, just does the basic work and never actually gets the highest score that their teachers have advised they most likely will. They would have been better off to work hard in 2-unit maths, to be honest.
There's a question that came in through from our friends on the webinar, which is related to the topic of this, but looking at children at a younger age. So what can parents do to help encourage children of primary school age to develop their maths and science abilities and interest?
There are lots of things. One of them is to never show your fear. And I think that's the most important, and to not gender split that between the parents if there are parents of different genders. I think the tendency is go and ask dad, uncle, brother about your maths homework, and not let's sit down and nut through it together. The other thing that they can do is just really practical things like games of snakes and ladders with dice, with 2 dice, with 3 dice, involving students in the same way you do reading every day at home. You know, counting out the number of mandarins into a plastic bag at Woolworths for a 3-year-old is a great activity for them to do. It takes you longer to do your shopping. But those kinds of things, they can be really, really basic things. You know, I once made the mistake of saying to my daughter, can you count out the Fruit Loops in your bowl? Yes, I was the bad mother who gave her Fruit Loops. And she did. And she was determined to finish it one by one. But it's those really basic everyday activities that parents can do and involve. Go to museums, go to the galleries. There's always something mathsy going on. And speaking of Alan Finkel, he has initiated a project called the Star Portal, which is advice for parents about STEM offerings in their community. And you can log in and find out about events going on just around the corner and take your children to those. So that's what that was designed for.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think if we want to work on if we want to work on gender stereotype thing, we needed to start from primary school, because if we ask like a high school students, do you think girls and boys can do math equally well? They all know how to answer this question because they are told to say, oh, girls and boys can do math equally well. But in primary school, the parents and the teachers, they convey the gender stereotype opinion when they're dealing with the kids. So yeah, I think teachers have and the parents have a lot to do in primary school.
Thank you. Was there a question?
So some of the speakers have talked about what we can say to our daughters to help get them into maths. I was wondering what your thoughts are on what we could say to our sons to encourage girls to get into maths.
I don't think the message is that different. And I think it's about dealing with those little niggles. So having the conversation that Ning has just said, that anyone can do anything. It's up to your interest and not necessarily your ability, because you can learn that, but let's go and investigate, let's go and find out together. And just calling it out when you see it. And that's not just women in the audience calling it out, but all of us calling it out when we see it.
Our research data shows that boys are influenced by different things from girls. Boys, they would like to see how math is used in the real world. Like in our survey, we have some questions that say, I have the opportunity to hear people talking about how math is used in their jobs, and I have the opportunity to see how math is used outside school. And those two items are most influential to boys, but they don't have significant influence on girls. So the girls are more influenced by their friends' opinion and the teacher's opinion. So there is a gender difference there. And so if we really want to encourage boys would like to see the utility, the usefulness of math. I think, yeah, that's what we found in the data. Okay.
Thank you. I think there was a question from the gentleman.
First, just a statement. I have a daughter who does surveys of school students, and she's been involved in surveying 3,130 primarily New South Wales high school students between 15 and 18. And they were asked out of 22 different skills, both sort of soft and foundational ones, which is the one that you would most like to be better at. And maths was number one on that list. From a lot of the discussion earlier, I got the impression that for those who understand the difference between fixed mindsets and growth mindsets, maths sounds like it's a bit of an area where a lot of people, not just kids, have perceptions of my ability mathematically is something sort of fixed, preordained or whatever, and I think there's a mindset issue there somewhere.
I often ask students to draw themselves as mathematicians or draw themselves as mathematical thinkers, and now draw your friend, and now draw a friend who's good at maths. And I always do that one last. And one child drew a really complicated cog system, it was fantastic for the very mathsy kid, and a really simple one for himself. This is a boy. And a slightly different one for his friend, because his friend was into drawing, and so that picture inside his brain was very different. And it was so stark that the maths kid was seen as someone special, and I'm not a maths kid. And that's a very common. So that perception, I've seen that in 4-year-olds. That self-perception of I have a maths brain or I don't have a maths brain is very, very early.
And wasn't it your research as well that showed that 25% less confidence in maths, there's been some teaching interventions that using the growth mindset that have been shown to increase both the girls' and boys' confidence to, similar and so, that and yeah, I've had some conversations with teachers, sorry, Ning, just asking how the teachers deal with this lack of confidence in girls, and just some simple examples there. But what one teacher said, first of all, she gets very comfortable with silence, because if she puts a hard question out to the kids, the girls, especially if it's an all-girls school, no one will put up their hand, and she just waits in silence until somebody finally does. And the other technique that she said she uses was to wait for them to, sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. I had 4 hours sleep last night. On a plane from Perth. What was the, oh yes, she actually, if a kid is struggling at maths, a girl, and she says that's not your problem, that's my problem as the teacher. And we've got to work on this together. So trying to remove that maths anxiety of I'm bad at maths, and trying to make it the teacher's responsibility to explain it better.
One of the key tenets of that fixed mindset, growth mindset philosophy is the power of the word yet. I don't know fractions. It's very different to I don't know fractions yet. And we use that with our outreach work. So all of our 120 schools take on a lot of the growth mindset work and run it right through the whole school, right across every subject. But it's very, very strong. It's very powerful.
Janine, could I now ask a question? Re your 120 outreach schools, you showed some of the subjective comments and so on about it, but I was just wondering about any data regarding changes in cohorts.
That's the data that Ning's been reporting on, so that's going to be in all of our reporting going forward.
Our Chief Maths Outreach officers go to those 120 schools to deliver specially designed sessions. And before each session and after each session, we conduct 3-minute surveys. In those surveys, we ask, we want to know how students think about math and whether they think they have a math brain or whether they think they can learn new math. Actually, our data found that girls are less confident, much less confident than boys. But after the intervention sessions, the girls increase their confidence more than boys. Both girls and boys increased, but the increase in girls is bigger than that for boys, so which is good. So we would think a girl, because we conducted the activities in group. So theories support that girls, they work better in a more collaborative environment, while boys may work better in a more competitive environment. So our activities are designed to happen in groups. That's one thing. The other thing is we always explain to the class includes both girls and boys, that everyone can learn math. Yeah, there's no such thing like I don't have a math brain. No, you learn math just as you learn how to play basketball. Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you. We've just about run out of time, I'm afraid, for questions. No, that's super questions, and it's great to hear lots of enthusiastic talk. So let us put our hands together and thank very much the panelists before we hand back to Nicolette.
Thanks, Leslie, and thanks to our panelists. And I really would encourage you to read some of those reports. They're fantastic. So we're just going to finish off. We're actually launching some See What We See ads as part of International Women's Day. So some of you would have seen that we've actually relaunched this campaign, profiling some of what I like to refer to as our rock star actuaries. And today we're going to actually launch some that are profiling some of our leading female actuaries. Let's show you. So that's launching today. I'm not going to read the rest. And now, I'm just going to play you a video just featuring those people.
We're really thinking about how much does this business need to be sustainable over the long term. If we think that actually a particular claim is more likely to happen than it used to be, we need to make sure we're holding enough capital for that. It's a really important thing to make sure that we're looking after the customers when they need it most.
During the reform process of the New South Wales CTP scheme, we were looking at what's going to reduce the frictional costs, what's going to produce stability in the scheme so it can be priced more accurately, and what's going to deliver good outcomes for those people who are injured in motor vehicle accidents.
Being aware of some of the limitations of the data. That's the robustness that we bring to the debate. Because of our work, the financial system is safer, more sustainable and more equitable.
I've been involved in tax reform, age pension reform, housing reform, but in all those cases it's not about trying to get the best outcome for only one segment of the population. It's really looking at from a point of view of what's fair.
Actuaries are uniquely placed in that we do need to look at the customer and the shareholder. It's not just about one or the other, it's helping understand that a sustainable business in the long term is actually about succeeding for both. Actuaries can really help in understanding those trade-offs. A lot of people think of risk in terms of the kind of operational risk and controls, what can go wrong and can we stop it going wrong. We also have to think about risk in the range of potential outcomes. You know, how the market's going to move, is the stock market going to go up at the same time as interest rates go down or vice versa? How protected are we against those things?
My role was to quantify the cost of a national redress scheme for survivors of child sexual abuse. There'd never been a scheme like this one anywhere in Australia or overseas, so it was important to get a realistic number. Without that information, the institutions who would be funding that scheme wouldn't be able to take a decision about whether they had the financial capacity to opt in. The actuarial profession has long had its roots in terms of concepts such as fairness and equity. Those concepts relate very well to the public interest.
Up until 2017, there was no comprehensive view of the cost of insurance in super. We had to put together 6 different data sets. The result is informative but also surprising. There are pockets of our community that is being adversely affected. It's also the structure of the superannuation system that's causing some of those impact.
Many people in the super industry are about trying to get more money for retirees, better tax, more money. But then you think of, well, what about the hard-working other people on low incomes that are paying much higher tax, struggling to survive? I don't believe that good policy is about looking after one group of people. I believe it's saying, well, what's fair? But in terms of encouraging employers to hire older people, to give them a chance, not penalising them for going back to work, that's what I think is good policy.
So, really good. Well done, Justin. Thank you, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for coming, and please keep the feedback coming. Thanks a lot.